My firm focuses almost exclusively on commercial design and construction projects. So a lot of people have asked me, why would you create, a flat fee, process-driven method of preparing design and construction contracts for residential projects when that's not your firm's bread and butter? You're a commercial project attorney. Why are you, playing around with residential construction contracts? And I think the reason is that nobody is stepped into this essential role, and there are a lot of homeowners that are getting hurt, as they are making the biggest financial investments of their lives and building their dream homes. And I see an opportunity to help the contractors and the architects and the project owners, who are involved in residential projects, achieve the same sort of win-win outcomes. The good work for a fair price, the dispute avoidance that is the bread and butter of my practice on commercial projects. I'm a peacemaker. I am a lawyer who, goes to court. I'm a litigator. I do arbitration. I do litigation. Of course, most true construction attorneys are not just transactional. They don't just negotiate contracts. That's certainly true for me as well. Even though I spend a lot of my time negotiating design and construction contracts, I do resolve disputes as well. And I think that litigation's terrible. I think that arbitration is it's terrible. I mean, if you are trying to build something and you're getting into the kind of conflict with your counterparties that results in you winding up in court or having to go present a case to an arbitrator, this isn't good for anybody. It's not an efficient allocation of economic resources. It's not a desired outcome, and it's not good for anyone. And it's so easy to avoid that pitfall, that all too common pitfall on design and construction projects that end with disappointed expectations and claims. It's very easy to avoid that. It's what I do every day on commercial projects, and I said to myself and my team, there's got to be a way that we could take what we know and make it affordable and to create a process for homeowners to achieve some of the same benefits. And so the little dent that I'm hoping to make in the world, making the world a better place, part of that involves keeping people out of preventable litigation. It's helping architects and contractors and project owners achieve cost-efficient dispute resolution in the event that they do wind up in a dispute, hopefully dispute avoidance so there are no disputes, and win-win outcomes. And there's really only one way to do that. There's only one way to bring about that kind of predictable, happy outcomes in design and construction projects, and that's for everybody to get on the same page early. Everyone's singing on the same sheet of music about what the expectations are of all the different parties that are going to play a role in the project. Timing, schedule, matters of insurance, contract terms, how everybody's going to play nicely together in the sandbox, and then to wrap that all up in like a nice web of design and construction contracts, where if people are going to have differing expectations, if they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't know that you expected me to do that, or that's not part of my pricing, or the way to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that the train doesn't jump the tracks in the middle of the project is to really shine a light on these issues at project outset, like before contracts are signed, so that all of the important issues that need to be addressed by all the project participants can really be thoughtfully addressed. Everybody winds up singing from the same sheet of music, and then critically, all of those assumptions are wrapped up in commercially reasonable construction contracts that set out the rules of the road for having an excellent project. If you are a homeowner, if you are a project owner, and you do not take the time at the beginning of the project to negotiate smart design contracts, owner architect agreements, owner engineer agreements, if you do not take the time to negotiate smart construction contracts, owner contractor agreements, and you don't make sure that all those different, contracts, this web of contracts, that plays off, itself as the project proceeds, if you're not going to take the time to have good design and construction contracts, you're, taking a huge chance. Because if your expectations are disappointed, but your expectations are just your subjective expectations, it's not something that is part of a business deal that's recorded in a contract. If you wind up having to pay a lot more, or if you wind up with an inferior home, or if you wind up, with a home that takes you years longer than you had expected to get complete, you can't go crying to a judge or an arbitrator, that the kind that is going to resolve, these sort of commercial disputes, disputes that arise on design and construction projects, because those judges and those arbitrators, they worship at the altar of predictability, not the altar of justice. So if your subjective opinions about how long the project should take are disappointed, but you don't have thoughtful schedule terms in your contract, you shouldn't expect a good outcome, in a claims process if you wind up there. And if you don't have a thoughtful, contract that spells out very clearly, like, what is the scope of the work that the contractor is going to be doing, in appropriate detail, and make sure that things are proceeding on the project in an intelligent way, so that the contractor is given everything that they need to actually make promises and then deliver on them, or be held accountable if they don't. If you don't have the project lined up the right way, I'm talking boots on the ground, the sequence of, the different things that are necessary for each party to contribute, and then bind it up in a smart contract, all that you're asking for is to have subjective expectations that you hold inside not be realized. And then when you call somebody like me and say, it's taken so much longer, it's cost so much more money, I've got something inferior. When I look at your contract, I'm going to say, there's not a whole lot that I can do for you. You're going to wind up in protracted litigation that's going to be expensive. It's going to take a couple years. You might be better off just putting your money in the stock market rather than investing in the claim, because it's going to be a coin toss, like what the jury's going to say in response to the fact that, your expectations were disappointed, because there's nothing in the contract that explains, that the contractor has to meet certain scheduling deadlines, or has to achieve certain quality standards, or can't charge you more money. And so if you want to have, good work for a fair price, if you want to have win-win outcomes, if you want to have dispute avoidance, hopefully, or cost-efficient resolutions of claims, heaven forbid that you wind up in a claim situation, you've got to have a good contract. And as somebody that has dedicated my career to making that little dent in the world on commercial projects, I feel it almost an obligation for me to try to bring the same to the residential construction market, which is being served by no one. Real estate lawyers are not construction lawyers. Real estate lawyers, their bread and butter is really not dealing with this stuff. And most people have probably never even heard of a construction lawyer, and it's almost never the case that a homeowner, no matter how sophisticated they may be, no matter how much money they're spending on their home, that they understand that this is really important to them. And so, we've created a flat fee, process-driven method of helping residential construction projects go well, by hoping to empower homeowners to get the same kind of excellent design and construction contracts that we deliver for our clients every day on commercial projects.